Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not a gallant courtier, a celebrated poet, or even the unfortunate pig getting roasted over the hearth. You're something far worse, a minor guest at a Tudor banquet. Not important enough to be remembered, not unimportant enough to be excused. You're the kind of person who gets invited because someone had to fill a seat and decided your name sounded just noble enough not to ruin the ambience. Before you're seated 4 places too close to the latrine and 3 places too far from the gravy, do me one small favour. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing who's tuning in from around the world. If you'd like early access to more of these slow, sarcastic spirals into historical discomfort, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. The invitation arrives on crumpled parchment, sealed with wax and contempt. It isn't addressed to you personally. Not really. The name scrawled across the top is spelled incorrectly, and the title following it is both outdated and generous. But it's yours, and the meaning is clear. You've been summoned to a banquet at the estate of Lord Whichever. No reason given, no choice offered. You're to present yourself at the appointed time, in proper attire, with proper manners, and with a properly feigned expression of gratitude. You read it twice just to be sure, but it doesn't change. You are not being invited, you are being expected. It's an honour, they say, a privilege, a chance to mingle with the realm's best and brightest. Though if that's true, the realm is in worse shape than you thought. You, after all, are neither best nor bright. You are nobility in the same way. A footstool is furniture, technically present, useful only when summoned, and best forgotten afterward. Your family scraped its way into a minor title generations ago, and has clung to it ever since like a barnacle to a rotting hull. You have no land to speak of, no money worth counting, and no real allies, which is exactly why you're on this list. A warm body in a half-decent doublet, with just enough rank to fill a seat without offending anyone's delicate hierarchy. You briefly consider declining. You imagine writing a gracious refusal, something about a lingering illness or an urgent estate matter, neither of which exist. But this is Tudor England, and no is not a word the powerful tolerate. Refuse an invitation like this, and best case, you're branded a bore. Worst case, you're suspected of treason, atheism, or whatever else the Crown is frowning upon that week. And once suspicion starts, it never ends. You've seen how quickly a simple absence turns into whispered rumours, and rumours turn into accusations, and accusations turn into a quiet midnight disappearance. The tower is always hungry, so you nod to yourself, fold the parchment in trembling fingers, and begin preparing for an evening that might very well be your last. And if not your last, certainly your least enjoyable. Preparation, of course, is its own small nightmare. You own exactly one outfit suitable for such an occasion. It was tailored when you were thinner, richer, and, if memory serves, happier. The doublet is stiff with age, its embroidery faded and fraying, its buttons mismatched and barely clinging. The hose is a gamble. You hope it still stretches, but you don't test it too hard. The shoes are worse. One sole flaps, the other leaks. You shine them anyway, using a cloth that smells of beeswax and defeat. The ruff is the final insult, a ring of starched cloth that scratches like a nettle and makes swallowing difficult, which may actually be a blessing later on. You comb your hair, you trim your nails, you examine your face in a cloudy bit of polished metal and consider whether your expression conveys the appropriate mix of deference and blandness. Not too proud, not too meek, not too anything. You're a background decoration, wallpaper with a pulse. You must appear grateful to be present and even more grateful to be ignored. You practice your bow 3 times and hope you don't forget it mid-movement. Last time you bowed too deeply and tore something in your back that still aches when it rains. When the day arrives, the weather is characteristically vindictive. Not a proper storm. That would at least justify a delay, but the slow, needling sort of drizzle that soaks through cloaks and spirits alike. The air smells of dung, wet straw, and impending misery. You mount the sorry old horse you borrowed from your cousin, the one with a limp and a tendency to fart when nervous, and set off down a road that is more mud than path. You keep your head low, not just to shield your face from the rain, but because it feels appropriate. A man riding to his own humiliation should not look too proud. The journey takes most of the day, not because of distance, but because your horse refuses to acknowledge that hills exist. Every incline is a negotiation. You pass a few villagers on the way, bent-backed labourers who look at you as if you're a particularly overdressed tax collector. You wave once, they don't wave back. You can't blame them. If your positions were reversed, you wouldn't wave either. By the time the manor comes into view, you are soaked through, cold to your marrow, and deeply regretting every choice that led you to this point. The estate looms ahead. Stone towers with decorative crenellations, narrow windows like suspicious eyes, and a gatehouse flanked by guards who look bored and mildly dangerous. The banners flutter weakly in the damp wind, bearing the family crest. A boar rampant, jaws agape, standing on a field of something you don't recognise. Probably metaphorical, possibly edible, almost certainly irrelevant. A servant meets you at the gate. He does not smile. He does not speak. He merely looks you over, your damp cloak, your muddy boots, your twitchy horset, and sighs. Then he gestures silently for you to dismount. You do so with all the grace of a sack of turnips falling from a cart. Something in your hip clicks. The servant says nothing, but you feel his disappointment radiating like heat from a forge. He takes your horse without ceremony and leads it away. You hope the beast bites someone, preferably someone important. The outer courtyard is exactly what you'd expect from a place built more for show than comfort. A sprawling patch of damp flagstones littered with hay hoofprints and the fragrant evidence of horses that were stabled too close and cleaned too seldom. You step gingerly around a particularly vile pile as two stable hands argue in low voices over whether your horse is lame or just resentful. No one acknowledges your presence with more than a glance, but you can feel the eyes on your boots, on your cloak, on the subtle sag of your belt, where your stomach once had more ambition. There's nothing welcoming about it. No trumpets, no applause, not even the forced warmth of false flattery. You're not expected to dazzle, just to behave, breathe quietly, and die inoffensively sometime later. The air here is a layered thing, a thick soup of damp wool, wet soil, acrid smoke, and whatever's drifting out of the livestock enclosure you just passed. Mixed in, somewhere deeper, is the sour note of overused chamber pots, and the unmistakable tang of stale ale leaking from a cracked cask. You breathe through your mouth and pretend not to notice. Everyone else is doing the same, which somehow makes it worse. The stench isn't a problem, it's just tradition. A nobleman's manor is, above all, a place of enduring smells. One day, someone will probably bottle this and call it something pretentious like your old musk of authority. A herald waits at the entrance to the great hall, standing behind a wooden podium that looks both ceremonial and completely unnecessary. His robes are impressive in that overwrought Tudor way, brocade, velvet, and at least two types of trim no one could possibly need. His wig is starting to curl from the damp, and he regards you with the kind of weary contempt usually reserved for mould. When you give your name, he doesn't blink. He doesn't write it down either. Instead, he turns toward the open doorway and bellows a noise that is almost, but not entirely, your name. He adds a syllable, misplaces a consonant, and manages to make it sound vaguely insulting. Heads turn inside the hall. Just a few. Enough. A cluster of men in embroidered coats glance over, and immediately decide you aren't worth remembering. A pair of young women seated on a bench near the entrance giggle behind gloved hands. Not at you, not quite, but near enough. The herald snorts quietly and waves you on without a word. You feel the heat of embarrassment creep up your neck, but you keep your face neutral. This is part of the experience. You're not here to impress, you're here to fill a gap. Wallpaper with a heartbeat, dressed up to look ornamental. You step across the threshold, and the great hall opens around you like a damp, flickering mouth. It's high-ceilinged and smoky, with tapestries clinging to stone walls like fungus. The fire at the far end spits and crackles beneath a roast you try not to identify too closely. Long wooden tables stretch down the length of the room, arranged in rigid tiers, high table at the top, where the host and most important guests will sit, and several descending rows of increasing mediocrity. You already know which one is yours. Probably back left, near the servants' entrance, and just downstream of the smoke from the kitchen hearth. As you walk, every detail of your appearance becomes a social resume. Your doublet, patched and just a bit too snug, tells them you've fallen on hard times, or were never on good ones. Your boots, still faintly damp from the ride, confirm you don't have a carriage. The slight unevenness in your gait from the ride and the unfortunate saddle bruise says you're a poor horseman, and your bow, polite, practiced, just a fraction too shallow, announces to the room that you're neither a threat nor a prize. A nobleman, yes, but only barely. You are what happens when lineage outlasts relevance. A footman intercepts you halfway through the hall, gestures you toward your seat, and vanishes before you can ask his name. Not that you would. The seats are filling quickly. You catch snippets of conversation in every direction. Latin, French, and the thick slurred vowels of drunken nobility. The man seated closest to you smells of clove oil, and something more alarming, like dried milk left too close to a candle. You nod to him, and he grunts in response. You do not ask what he's wearing. You do not want to know. The higher tables sparkle with gold-threaded fabrics, and people who've never had to clean their own fingernails. You recognise one or two faces from woodcuts and gossip. Minor courtiers, a bishop with a lazy eye, a noblewoman rumoured to have poisoned her third husband with bad oysters. They laugh too loudly. They speak in phrases designed to be overheard. None of them look your way. You are beneath their concern, which is both a relief and a threat. In places like this, invisibility is only useful if you stay silent. One misstep, one ill-timed cough, one accidental glance at someone's mistress, and suddenly you become the evening's entertainment. You reach your seat just as a large dog lumbers past and sniffs your ankle, with more interest than anyone else has shown you all day. You consider petting it, but the dog bares its teeth with the bored professionalism of a beast that's seen 100 guests come and go. You retract your hand. The dog moves on. A servant hurries by carrying a tray of jellied something, fish possibly, or regrettably preserved vegetables, and nearly clips your elbow. You begin to wonder how many courses are planned. Then you remember where you are. The answer is too many. Before you can sit, you're expected to acknowledge the high table. A bow again, but slightly deeper, slightly slower. Your knees crack as you do it, and the noblewoman 2 seats over raises a single, plucked eyebrow. You pretend not to notice. A steward nods at you once, either as permission to sit, or as confirmation that he's already forgotten who you are. You lower yourself onto the bench and immediately realise it's damp. Whether from condensation, spilled drink, or something worse, you don't ask. You shift. The bench does not improve. A harpsichord plinks somewhere in the corner, badly out of tune. The music bounces off the stone walls in awkward bursts, like a cat learning to walk in shoes. The player is determined, if not skilled, and the melody dissolves into dissonance before being drowned out entirely by the sound of pewter goblets clanging together in a forced toast. You raise your own cup, still empty, and hope you're not expected to say anything. You're not even sure who toasted. You just copy the motion and sip at nothing. Just as you begin to settle, just as you think you might survive the first act of this spectacle with your dignity intact, a foul gust of air wafts across your seat. You turn slightly and realise, to your horror, that you've been seated directly along the corridor that leads to the privies. They're screened off, of course. No one wants to see that. But they are not, apparently, sealed in any meaningful way. Every time someone exits the curtained corner of shame, they bring with them a small cloud of despair. And you're downwind. You smile. You have to. You smile like someone being sketched for a public hanging. Someone across the table makes eye contact, and you nod politely, praying they don't speak to you. You already regret the next several hours, and they haven't even served the first course. You're still fanning the latest privy breeze away from your face, when a servant appears beside you, holding what can only be described as a ceremonial bowl of mild regret. It's brass dented and already filled with a thin layer of brownish water that looks like it was last changed sometime in the reign of Henry VII. Floating on the surface are things you try very hard not to identify. Bits of lint, oily film, the occasional grey flake that might once have been skin or pastry, or possibly both. The servant stares at you blankly. It's your turn to wash. This is the cleanse, a deeply respected Tudor tradition that serves no hygienic purpose whatsoever, but is performed before every major feast, with the same gravity one might expect at a coronation. You know the steps, of course. Everyone does. You've practiced them since you were old enough to be told you'd someday be worth enough to embarrass yourself in front of wealthier people. The servant tilts the bowl slightly, and you reach out, dipping your hands into the lukewarm slurry with the kind of slow caution normally reserved for touching corpses or diplomatic letters. The water is slick, not from soap, because that isn't part of the ritual, but from whatever has been left behind by the parade of hands before yours. The sensation is repulsive, not quite warm, not quite cold, but viscous in a way that suggests something biological is happening in there. You rub your fingers together because you're meant to, not because you believe anything is being removed. It's not cleansing, it's redistribution. You feel as though you're trading one person's grime for another's, and neither of you got the better deal. After your brief swirl through medieval microbe soup, the servant hands you a cloth. It is, to your mild astonishment, damp and only partially stained. You pat your hands dry, or at least less wet, trying not to smear whatever residue remains across the cuffs of your doublet. You glance down the table and note that no one looks cleaner after this process. Just wetter and vaguely shinier. It's not about being clean. It's about being seen to be clean. In Tudor society, that's all that really matters. The basin moves on. Across from you, an elderly gentleman with a truly heroic double chin performs the ritual without hesitation, plunging his fat fingers into the broth and humming to himself like a man dipping into a cherished childhood memory. His wig is slightly askew, and as he withdraws his hands, he absently scratches at the side of his head. A small shape, oval, quick, darts from beneath the edge of the wig into the folds of his collar. No one comments. You stare at your now damp hands and try not to think about it. Further down the table, a young man who arrived late, younger son of some knight, judging by the way he carries himself like a chicken pretending to be a hawk, dramatically flourishes his fingers above the bowl, lets them dip, then flicks droplets onto the floor, with the same enthusiasm a dog might use to dry its ears. He grins at no one in particular, shakes out his sleeves, and makes a show of inspecting his nails. They're immaculate, which means he either arrived with them that way, or the family employs someone to tend to them. You do not have a nail servant. You do not even have decent nails. The process continues around the room. Every table has its own basin, its own damp rag, and its own trail of disappointed bacteria. One particularly rotund guest down the row chooses to skip the formality entirely, instead taking the cloth directly and using it to mop his brow before passing it along with the cheerful indifference of a man who has long since ceased to care whether he offends anyone. No one challenges him. That sort of confidence, you suspect, only comes from immense wealth, hereditary titles, or total madness, possibly all three. You sit back down, wiping your palms once more on your thighs for good measure, and glance around. The musicians are still tuning, if it can be called that, creating an ambient din that sounds like someone throwing cats at a wall made of bells. A page boy trips on a rush mat and nearly sends a stack of pewter plates tumbling. Somewhere near the hearth, a dog growls at another dog. The noise swells and dims like waves, and above it all is the steady, rising scent of what you can only describe as meat approaching its deadline. You glance toward the main door just in time to see a large, glistening boar's head being carried in on a silver platter. Its eyes are open, its tusks polished, and its expression one of mild surprise. The sort of look that says, "I didn't think it would end like this," which feels appropriate. A cluster of kitchen staff follow close behind, each holding some manner of animal, vegetable, or thing that was probably once edible. You're not entirely sure which is which. The sheer volume of it all is staggering. Breads, pies, glazed birds, jellied somethings that quiver with malice. And yet none of this is for you. Not yet. Because you're still waiting. The first course hasn't been served. That little hand bath was merely the prelude, the prologue to the digestive opera that is about to unfold. Your stomach, not fully convinced this isn't a trap, emits a low, uncertain groan. You're not hungry exactly. The smells in this room have mostly suppressed that. But you are acutely aware that you will soon be required to eat, and nothing about that feels safe. You glance across the table again. The man who was scratching his wig is now pulling something from his teeth with a fingernail. He inspects it briefly, then flicks it toward the floor. No one flinches. The man beside him is engaged in a quiet, one-sided conversation with the contents of his goblet. Another has removed his shoes entirely and is wiggling his toes near the fire, as if this were his private sitting room. This is what passes for noble decorum, apparently. You're beginning to suspect that etiquette, like meat, only pretends to be fresh in places like this. To your left, a woman coughs twice into her gloved hand and tucks it neatly into her sleeve. You watch a fleck of something, saliva or worse, land in a nearby dish. The servant standing behind her winces but says nothing. No one moves the dish. A moment later, it is spirited away and replaced by another that looks identical. You wonder if it's the same one. You wonder if it matters. And still, the basin continues its slow journey around the hall, a greasy baptism marking each guest as officially ready to endure the coming trials. You think of the water now coating your hands. You think of where those hands will soon go, into bread, onto knives, around goblets that dozens have touched and none have cleaned. You suppress the urge to scratch your face. You imagine your skin as a fragile wall, barely holding back the invasion of Tudor hospitality. It is not a reassuring thought. Then finally a voice cuts through the chatter. A servant, standing near the centre of the hall, raises a hand and calls out that the first course is being served. The words echo through the vaulted ceiling, like a church bell tolling for the innocent. There's a brief pause, a collective inhale, and then movement. Trays are lifted, platters are passed. The ritual has begun in earnest. You sit straighter, adjust your sleeves, and offer the table your best impression of composure. Because this is it. The food is coming. The performance has begun. And you, poor fool, are part of the act. The first course arrives like a siege engine. Slowly, heavily, and with far too much fanfare, a parade of servants enters the hall, balancing enormous trays that steam, hiss, or drip according to their contents. The smells hit you in layers: sour wine, sweetened fat, boiled root vegetables, gone gummy in their own starch, and a sort of high yeasty tang that might be ale-battered meat or might be something no longer legally classified as food. There's a moment of anticipation, forced hungry silence as everyone pretends to marvel, and then the dishes begin landing on the tables with heavy thuds that shake the trenchers and send rivulets of brown liquid sloshing across the wood. You're too far down the hierarchy to be served first, which is something of a blessing. It gives you time to prepare, to study what's approaching and brace yourself. The first platter within reach is a pottage, a thick, greyish slop of lentils, barley, and suspiciously chewy things that were probably once onions. It steams ominously, like a bog on a warm day. The smell is heavy with garlic and something fermented, maybe old cheese, maybe cabbage that's been overly enthusiastic. Someone ladles it out with a carved wooden spoon, and it lands on the trencher in front of you with a wet, heavy plorp. The trenchers themselves are, in theory, edible. Flat slabs of stale bread, a day or two past relevance, pressed and dried into a platform for your suffering. In practice, they function as absorbent plates, soaking up grease, sauce, and whatever fluids happen to leak from the meat above. No one eats them unless they're desperate. You look around. Several people are already gnawing on their trenchers, which tells you exactly how desperate everyone is. You contemplate taking a bite, and then decide to wait until the pottage has fully soaked through. Easier on the teeth, worse on the soul. Next comes the stewed offal, a rich term for what is essentially everything inside an animal that's normally thrown away, boiled down into a kind of meat sludge and seasoned with cloves, pepper, and whatever else was closest to the cook's hand when they gave up. It's dark, sticky, and clings to the spoon like tar. Someone makes a show of praising the cook's generosity, and you nod along because that's what you're supposed to do, even though the smell is making the corners of your eyes water. The man across from you licks his lips and reaches forward with a kind of reverent hunger. You immediately lose any appetite you had left. A third dish arrives, a roast bird of some kind, blackened at the wing tips and glazed with a shiny, gelatinous sauce that drips slowly down its side like syrup off an old boot. The meat is dark, almost purplish, and difficult to identify. It might be pigeon, it might be swan, it might be a very bold duck that lost a bet. A wedge of its neck is missing, and you can see a sliver of pink flesh beneath the skin. Not pink like it was cooked rare, pink like it was cooked badly. There is a difference. The skin, meanwhile, has been crisped to the consistency of parchment and cracks loudly as someone tears a piece free with bare fingers. Everything smells like it's been left too close to a fire, too far from salt, and much too long out of anything resembling cold storage. Nothing is safe. The meat is either overdone or nearly raw, with no middle ground. The vegetables, if they can be called that, have surrendered to the boiling process entirely, collapsing into limp, tasteless strings of former nutrition. Even the bread is questionable, dusted with ash or herbs or possibly something that grew on it in protest. You choose a slice that looks relatively benign and use it to mop up a bit of the stew, hoping that blandness might outweigh texture. Your seat is not far from one of the kitchen doors, and as it swings open with each new wave of dishes, you get flashes of the preparation process. Scullery boys elbow deep in carcasses, steam rising from cauldrons, knives hacking through joints with brutal efficiency. A pig's head sits on a table near the back, its mouth propped open, with a carved apple and its eyes replaced by raisins. A cook picks his nose absent-mindedly as he walks past it. You turn back to your plate and decide not to look again. The man beside you has already begun eating. His technique involves fingers, enthusiasm, and no concern for dignity. He scoops a pile of the stewed offal onto his trencher and tears into it with a groan of satisfaction, the kind of sound usually reserved for brothels and battlefield deaths. Grease shines on his chin and collects in his beard. He smacks his lips after every bite, Across from him, a woman with powdered cheeks and a ruffled collar picks daintily at something that might be eel, carefully pushing each bite around before reluctantly lifting it to her lips. Her face never moves. You can't tell if she's pleased or simply suppressing a gag. Eventually, a servant pauses in front of you with a platter of roasted meat, thick, uneven slabs of something red and dripping. He doesn't ask what you want. He drops a slice onto your trencher with a wet splat, then moves on. The meat twitches slightly when it lands, and for one brief moment, you are forced to confront the possibility that it's still alive, just insulted. You stare at it. It stares back. You pick up your knife. The knife is dull because of course it is. You saw someone earlier using theirs to pry open a crusted pie and then wipe it on the tablecloth. It now lies in front of you, barely able to slice through the gravy pooling beneath your slab. You saw at the meat slowly, hoping no one's watching too closely. But someone always is. Across the table, a woman with thin lips and sharper eyes watches you with open curiosity. She hasn't spoken a word all night, but she's clearly keeping tally of etiquette, posture, portion size. You meet her gaze briefly, then lower your eyes and cut a piece loose. It's hot, which is almost worse. The temperature suggests it should be safe, but the smell tells a different story. There's a sourness beneath the surface, like old blood and cloves, and something vaguely metallic. You lift it to your mouth, pause and then take the bite. It resists. The texture is halfway between sinew and sponge, and the flavour is confused, as though the meat can't decide whether it wants to be savoury or rotten. You chew again. You wish you didn't have to. The woman across from you raises one eyebrow. You swallow. A second bite follows, smaller, wary. You dip it in the sauce first, which turns out to be some kind of mustard wine reduction that burns slightly and clings to your teeth like tar. It does not improve the meat, nothing could. You take a sip of wine to wash it down, and it's sour enough to sting. Not vinegar, not quite, but close. A sharp, fruitless red that only adds another confusing layer to the sensory assault. You cough once quietly. A servant appears to refill your goblet before you can wave him off. The pressure to continue is overwhelming. You try the pottage next. It's lukewarm now and has congealed into something that can technically be called solid. It slumps onto your spoon like a depressed pudding and slides into your mouth with all the grace of boiled wallpaper paste. The texture is gluey, the flavour uneven, lentils mostly, with the occasional crunch that shouldn't be there. You bite something hard. You do not investigate. The stew follows. You'd hoped it might be better. It isn't. The offal is aggressively seasoned, as though someone tried to drown the flavour in cloves and then gave up halfway through. The meat melts in your mouth, but not in the good way, more like it's disintegrating, as if the cooking process only loosened the sinews rather than tenderized them. You chew, you regret it. You chew again. Something bursts. A bit of sauce dribbles down your chin. You wipe it away with a napkin that feels faintly crusty. You glance up again. The silent woman is still watching. You smile because what else can you do? She tilts her head slightly and spears a piece of jelly with her fork. And so you continue. Bite after bite, swallow after swallow, you eat slowly, carefully, with both hands bracing your trencher, as though afraid it might run. And all the while, you are acutely aware of the eyes, the judgment, the rank. You are not eating to nourish yourself. You are eating to survive. And you haven't even reached the main course. Just as you're resigning yourself to the idea that the pottage was the worst of it, that perhaps this entire evening will be little more than overcooked stew and undercooked meat, a trumpet sounds from somewhere near the dais. Not a subtle signal, not a quiet chime, but a full-bodied, teeth-rattling blast that ricochets off the stone walls and silences the room like a slap. Conversation dies, laughter fades. Even the dog stops sniffing for a moment. It's not reverence, it's instinct, the body bracing for what comes next. Servants emerge from the side doors with a kind of stiff-legged solemnity usually reserved for pallbearers. Each carries a platter large enough to bury a child in, and every platter holds something extravagant, horrifying, or both. These are the centerpieces, not meant simply to be eaten, but to be witnessed. The feast's visual climax. The edible performances that will be gossiped about long after the guests have forgotten who sat where or which uncle embarrassed himself during the toast. You sit up straighter, not from anticipation, but because you're not entirely sure what's coming and would prefer to meet it at eye level. The first thing placed near your table is a peacock, or to be more accurate, the taxidermied skin of a peacock, carefully stitched back over its own roasted body. The feathers shimmer in the candlelight, and the bird's head lolls slightly to one side, as though even in death it's lost the will to pretend this is dignified. Its beak is open, stuffed with some kind of spiced stuffing, and crowned with a sprig of rosemary, as if that makes it festive. The smell is rich, sweet, sour, and faintly metallic. One of the guests claps politely. You do not. Next comes a pie, but not just any pie, a lamprey pie. Oval, ornate, and oozing at the seams, its crust is carved with flourishes that seem to mock the contents within. You've seen lampreys before, in rivers, clinging to stones like parasites. You've never considered eating one, and now that you've seen what they look like, when minced into a congealed slab of pastry and bile, you're certain you were right. The top has split slightly from the heat, and you can see one of the lamprey's circular, teeth-ringed mouths peeking out from within like a warning. It does not blink, you almost do. A boar's head follows, complete with glassy eyes and an apple jammed between its jaws. The apple has begun to shrivel, as though it knows what it's been made part of. The boar's face is strangely expressive, its skin crisped and shiny, and its ears standing at odd angles. The teeth, still intact, glint in the firelight. Someone remarks that it was a particularly fine kill, as though that makes eating the snout of a dead forest beast less grotesque. The cheeks are said to be the best part. You try very hard not to look too closely at the cheeks. Every one of these dishes is accompanied by a servant bearing a jug of gravy. Not sauce, gravy. The sort of gravy that could be used as mortar if cooled. It's thick, brown, and served steaming from pewter flagons, poured with flair over everything that doesn't move, and a few things that probably should. The smell is staggering. Animal fat, wine vinegar, cloves, nutmeg, and a hint of rot. The spices are generous not for flavour, but for disguise. Spoiled meat, after all, can be made tolerable with enough cinnamon and social pressure. Your trencher, already abused by the first course, receives another helping of indignity. A slice of something indistinct is dropped onto it with force. It might be venison, or mutton, or something closer to the mystery bird family. A second ladle of gravy follows, splashing outward and catching the sleeve of your neighbour, who doesn't react. He simply pats it dry with the same cloth he just used on his face, and continues gnawing on a shard of blackened meat that he seems to believe is poultry. You want to ask him what kind, you don't. The servant near your shoulder clears his throat and asks, as though reading from a script carved into the inside of his skull, if you find the dish satisfactory. You look down at your trencher. The meat has started to sag inward, like it's collapsing from spiritual exhaustion. The gravy is soaking into the bread, turning it a shade of brown you've only seen in bruises. You glance up at the servant. He's not smiling. He's not even blinking. You tell him it's excellent. He nods, says nothing, and moves on. You take a breath and pick up your knife. It's the same one from earlier, still a bit sticky with whatever the first course left behind. You begin cutting the meat, which resists just enough to make the process feel adversarial. The inside is grey with hints of pink. You assume that's fine. You assume a lot. You take a bite. It is not fine. The flavour is aggressive. It comes at you all at once, iron, salt, clove, something tangy and wrong, and then it lingers, The texture doesn't help. The outer crust is burnt and dry, but the interior is damp in a way that suggests it had no desire to be cooked at all. It chews like liver, but tastes like regret. You swallow, mostly because spitting it out would be noticed, and nothing is worse than being noticed during the main course. The wine helps, or rather, it distracts. It's still sour, but now, compared to the food, it tastes almost clean. You take a larger sip than necessary, and cough slightly as it burns on the way down. Across the table, another guest raises their goblet in what might be solidarity or mockery. You toast back anyway. Etiquette demands it. You smile, you sweat. More dishes arrive. A roast goose with what appear to be oranges shoved into every available cavity. A bread pudding that is somehow both undercooked and charred. A selection of sausages, arranged in a pattern you suspect was meant to be decorative, but reads more like a crude joke. Someone begins slicing a jelly moulded in the shape of a castle. The jelly trembles violently with every cut. So do you. The hall is warmer now. Heat from the hearths, from the crowd, from the sweating beasts in the centre of every table. The air hangs thick with grease, spice, and the sour note of cooked blood. You loosen your collar slightly, hoping no one notices, and shift on the bench. The back of your knees are damp. Your face is flushed. You can feel the meal settling in your stomach like wet cement. Someone nearby lets out a quiet belch and mutters a half-hearted apology. No one reacts. The music starts up again, a lute this time, accompanied by a shrill pipe. And the dissonance grates against your already frayed nerves. You try another bite of meat. You regret it instantly. The second helping is colder and somehow tougher, and the gravy has started to separate, leaving a film on your tongue that refuses to be washed away. And still, the compliments must flow. Praise for the cook, for the host, for the quality of the boar's brow meat. You nod at the right moments, murmur your approval, raise your goblet with what you hope is convincing joy. You are sweating profusely. Your hands shake slightly when you reach for more bread. You chew slowly. You smile. You reconsider every decision that brought you here, starting with the moment you didn't burn that invitation when you had the chance. The main course is not over, not even close, but you are. You are full. You are nauseous. You are deeply aware that you've only survived the first act of this grotesque performance, and there is still dessert to come, and toasts, and more wine, and the lingering, dreadful threat of being forced to socialise. You dab your forehead with your sleeve and take another sip of wine. It doesn't help. You know something is about to go wrong the moment the lute makes a sound. Not a song, not a chord, just a single, lonely, miserable twang that echoes off the stone walls like a warning shot. One of the minstrels is tuning, or at least, he's pretending to. You'd almost respect him more if he simply admitted the instrument was beyond salvation and moved on to interpretive coughing. But no, he plucks and plinks with great theatrical seriousness, face scrunched as though choosing the precise note that will finally make his ancestors proud. Around him, other musicians begin their own personal journeys into tonal chaos. A viol being sawed to death in slow motion, a recorder emitting the squeals of a wounded goose, and a harpist whose idea of rhythm seems to involve dropping her elbow into the strings every so often for emphasis. This is the entertainment portion of the evening, a phrase that, here, serves less as a promise and more as a threat. You knew it was coming. The Tudor Banquet isn't just about food, it's about spectacle, distraction, noise layered on indigestion, like musical pepperground over rotting meat. One doesn't simply eat a peacock and go home. No, you must also endure what passes for courtly amusement, which, judging by the opening act, will be less amusing and more psychologically erosive. The first full piece begins with a flourish. It's a lute solo, a long one, performed by a man whose facial hair has been sculpted into a shape that suggests both commitment and poor judgment. He sits with one boot propped on a footstool, and one eyebrow permanently raised, as though he's about to insult you in rhyme. The melody he plucks is complex, meandering, and utterly devoid of joy. It stumbles between keys like a drunkard finding his way home via rooftops. The performance goes on for what feels like days. You watch a candle burn halfway down, while he hammers away at the same 5 notes, with increasing speed and decreasing relevance. You briefly wonder if he's being paid by the note. Every so often he looks up and makes eye contact with someone. Not the nobles at the high table. They've all retreated into their wine goblets, or turned their backs to whisper behind their fans. No, he chooses his audience from the lower tables where people like you sit, too polite or too low rank to escape. And when his gaze lands on you, sharp, expectant, unblinking, you are forced to nod, to smile, to feign appreciation for a sound that could qualify as a method of interrogation in less civilized lands. He finally ends with a flourish that seems to surprise even him, and a smattering of applause follows. You join in, you clap as if grateful he didn't continue into the next century. The next act is harder to define. A group of players in garishly mismatched costumes stumbles into the room, dragging behind them a cart draped in cloth and mystery. They are jesters, in theory, but closer in truth to chaotic agents of social disruption. Painted faces, jangling bells, exaggerated grins. The whole ensemble looks like a troupe of clowns who've recently committed a crime. The lead jester is short, wiry, and far too confident. He twirls a wooden baton and announces they will perform a scene from The Tragedy of Poor Sir Flatbottom, which, he assures the room, is a tale of great moral importance, and several fart jokes. The performance is somehow worse than expected. It involves 2 hand puppets, 3 unfortunate metaphors, and an extended sequence in which one puppet seduces the other by vomiting into a velvet pouch. The crowd's response is mixed. Some laugh, some wince. One man chokes on his wine and has to be slapped on the back by a passing servant. The jesters don't care. They're not here for approval. They're here for disruption. Between scenes, the lead jester dances down the aisle between tables, pointing at guests and calling out improvised insults. When he reaches your end of the room, he pauses, looks directly at you, and declares loudly that you have the arse of a priest and the hairline of a heretic. Laughter erupts. You smile painfully. You cannot object. You cannot retaliate. You are low enough to be mocked, but not important enough to be spared. Then comes the competition. A game, the jester explains, to lift the spirits of the hall. It is a flatulence contest, or the noble wind as he calls it, and it will be judged by volume, duration, and musicality. 2 brave volunteers rise from the back of the room, one already red-faced from drink, the other proudly patting his belly like a war drum. You stare into your wine and try to disappear. The contest begins with grunts, postures, and a level of sincerity that suggests both men have trained for this moment. The second man wins narrowly, with a sound that vibrates the rushes beneath your feet. He is awarded a sweetmeat and a standing ovation. The music resumes immediately afterward, as if nothing has happened. You think the worst must be over. You are wrong. There is a commotion at the far end of the hall. A group of servants hurries in, their arms outstretched, their voices low and urgent. The crowd shifts. Some rise to their feet. Others lean forward, whispering. The jesters retreat. A trumpet sounds again, not as grand as before, but insistent. You turn your head and that's when you see it. A bear. A full-grown, muzzle-wearing, chain-dragging bear led into the hall by 2 handlers in matching jerkins. The animal snorts, shakes its head, and eyes the crowd with what can only be described as mutual confusion. It's bear baiting. Indoors. There is no pit, no fence, no warning. Just a rope, some space cleared near the centre, and a sense of uneasy glee from the higher tables. The handlers gesture for the crowd to stay back. A second animal is brought in, a pair of dogs, lean and snarling, muzzled but already pawing at the floor. The room fills with a new kind of tension. Not delight, not horror, but something in between. The performance has taken a turn, and there is no intermission. The bear rears once, roaring low and guttural. The dogs snap their jaws in reply. The handlers exchange a look. Somewhere, a goblet shatters. You grip your bench with one hand and your goblet with the other. The man beside you shouts something unintelligible and throws a chicken bone toward the action. You consider leaving, but you don't. Because you can't. You are a guest, and you are still being watched. Your food sits uneaten on the table. You are no longer hungry. You are, however, very awake. The bear doesn't kill anyone, which is somehow more unnerving than if it had. After a few tense minutes of posturing and snapping and handlers yanking on chains, the dogs are led out. The bear is placated with a hunk of meat the size of your forearm, and the whole sordid affair is dismissed with a wave of the host's hand, as though it were nothing more than a particularly enthusiastic card trick. The musicians resume, as if no one just risked being mauled beside the salad. Servants clear the blood-streaked rushes with practiced indifference, and the evening slides seamlessly back into its regular rhythm of wine performance and quiet horror. You sneeze. Just once, into your sleeve, because you're not an animal. You even do it quietly, turning your head and muting the sound in the crook of your elbow, like you've seen priests do during sermons. It's instinctive, harmless. Or it would be if you weren't seated at a Tudor banquet in full view of 40 people with more money, influence, and barely restrained paranoia than you. There's a pause around you, subtle but immediate, like a ripple across stagnant water. A few eyes flick your way. The conversation doesn't stop, but it stutters. You press your handkerchief discreetly to your nose and murmur something about the draft. Then you pretend it didn't happen. The problem isn't the sneeze, it's that anything can be the problem. Here now, in this gilded swamp of gossip and gravy, every movement is watched. Every gesture is noted, not because you matter, but because someone at the table is always bored, always looking for a reason to talk about someone else. You are low enough on the social ladder that you can't afford to draw attention, but just high enough that people feel permitted to comment if you do. It's the worst possible position. Visible but irrelevant, present but expendable. One slip, one ill-timed cough or awkward reach across a platter, and you become a punchline. Or worse, a lesson. You've spent the last hour navigating the table like it's a minefield, and the mines are made of etiquette. The rules are numerous, contradictory, and enforced by people who've never had to learn them because they invented them. Don't scratch yourself, even if something is crawling. Don't shift too much on the bench, even if the damp wood is now embedded in your thighs. Don't belch unless someone of higher rank does first, in which case you're expected to join in with a chuckle and a second, fainter echo, as if your stomach's suffering must harmonise with your betters. You must not speak too loudly. You must not speak too softly. You must not interrupt, unless it's to laugh at someone more important's joke. And even then, your laughter must be perfectly timed, not too long, not too loud, and never more amused than the host's. You must not lean on the table, rest your elbows, or use your hands unless absolutely necessary. And even then, only in ways that suggest you were taught by someone worth remembering. Your knife is your best friend and your worst betrayer. You are expected to use it for everything: cutting meat, transferring food to your mouth, buttering bread, warding off communicable illness. And yet you must never wave it, never point with it, never lick it, never hold it too long in case you look like you're considering doing something improper with it. Use it, but do not let it become an extension of your personality. You are not here to have personality. You are here to have manners. Fingers are allowed only for trenchers, and only for peeling the crust, not scooping or tearing or dragging food across your plate like a starving badger. You made that mistake once, early in the meal, pulling apart a too dry bit of bread with both hands, while trying to dislodge a glob of gravy-soaked meat. You felt eyes on you then too, silent judgment from across the table. Someone coughed, someone else looked away, too quickly. You placed the bread down with exaggerated care and reached for your goblet instead. The universal Tudor gesture for, I'm going to pretend that didn't happen. Speaking of goblets, they are another hazard. You hold it wrong, you're a drunkard. You hold it too delicately, you're effeminate. You drink too often, you're uncouth. You refuse wine, and now you're suspect. Everyone drinks. Everyone. Even the bishop, who's already on his fourth refill and has begun humming softly through his teeth. Your own goblet has been topped up repeatedly, usually without your request. The wine is sharp and acidic, and it's beginning to fuzz the edges of your vision. You drink slowly, with measured sips, because the last thing you need is to lose control of your tongue before dessert arrives. Then there's the matter of spillage, the cardinal sin. A single splash of wine on the wrong sleeve, a smudge of meat juice on the wrong cuff, and suddenly you're not just clumsy, you're disrespectful, political, a threat to someone's status. The man next to you has elbows like siege weapons and nearly knocked over a gravy jug during the second course, but he laughed it off and blamed it on the table's poor design. And everyone agreed. If you'd done the same, the cook would be fired and you'd be mentioned by name in a letter to someone's cousin in the Privy Council. You've already memorised the reach distances for every nearby dish. The bread is safe. The pickled onions are a gamble. The vinegar is potent. And last time someone passed them, a drop hit Lady Something's lace sleeve, and she hasn't looked in your direction since. The roast quail is too far and too political. It's within arm's length, but you'd have to pass it across a nobleman's plate. And you can't do that without engaging him in conversation, which would lead to questions, which would lead to explanations, and there is no version of that outcome in which you come out ahead. Conversation itself is another performance. You must appear attentive, but not nosy, intelligent, but not opinionated, witty, but not bold. You offer brief observations, compliments on the embroidery of someone's sleeve, polite admiration for the centerpiece, vague agreement with anything said by someone wearing more gold than you. You are a non-entity with a vocabulary. That is your role. When someone laughs at something vulgar, you smile softly. When someone makes a joke at your expense, you laugh a little louder, because not laughing would be noticed, and noticing would be remembered. You itch everywhere. The collar of your doublet is soaked with sweat. Your left sock has twisted around your foot. Your back aches from the rigid posture you've been maintaining since the first course. Your stomach has settled into an uneasy gurgle, a slow rebellious churn that suggests the main course has begun its retaliation. You know better than to excuse yourself. No one leaves unless the host leaves, and the host, currently nodding along to an overwrought poem about roses and chastity, looks like he could go another 3 hours before blinking. So you sit, and you endure. Then someone raises a goblet. The conversation stutters again. Chairs creak, napkins are dropped. A servant scurries forward to top off the wine of a woman who very clearly indicated she'd had enough 2 courses ago. The man holding his goblet, a noble clearly, though you can't remember which one, clears his throat and launches into a toast. It's long. It's circuitous. It praises the host, the roast, the company, the crown, and something about divine providence that doesn't entirely track. You catch a reference to Cicero and a pun about venison. Everyone chuckles. Everyone raises their cups. You are not prepared. You grab your goblet a second too late, almost knocking it into the gravy boat. Your neighbour sees it. His eyebrow twitches. You recover quickly, lift the goblet, and murmur something that might pass for agreement with the toast. Everyone drinks. You drink. The wine burns more than it should. It goes down wrong. You cough once softly into your napkin. The woman across from you glances your way, just briefly, then looks back down at her plate with the sort of composure that feels like judgment. The toast ends. The music resumes. The moment passes, but it doesn't leave you. You take another sip, this one slower, and you smile, because you're still here, still upright, still surviving. For now. You're halfway through pretending to enjoy a spoonful of something that might be stewed parsnip when the lord of the manor turns toward you. Just like that. A twist of the neck, a shift in posture, and suddenly the weight of the room is bearing down directly on your spine. His expression is genial, the practiced smile of a man who's had everything handed to him and believes he's earned all of it. He lifts his goblet, leans slightly in your direction, and asks a question. You don't catch the first part. All you hear is your name, or something vaguely resembling your name, wrapped in the trailing tone of inquiry. Then silence. Every conversation in the room seems to pause. Not fully, but just enough. Forks slow, chairs shift, nearby guests lean just imperceptibly inward. No one stares. That would be gauche. But they're listening now. You are being spoken to by someone with power, which means your response will be catalogued, judged, and possibly repeated tomorrow in a context you won't enjoy. Your mind blanks. You swallow, you smile. It's the worst possible time to be you. You know the rules. You're meant to respond with deference, wit, and, above all, brevity. Cleverness is a trap. People in power don't want clever. They want charming and safe. You are not here to impress. You are here to reflect back their importance in a flattering, digestible way. Be too funny and you're presumptuous. Be too dull and you're forgettable. Either way, you lose. The only hope is to survive. You glance at the Lord's expression again. Affable, alert, wine softened. He's expecting something. Possibly an opinion on the venison. Possibly a comment about the bear. You have no idea. You give a vague, pleasant hum and pivot immediately to the safest ground you can find. The weather. You mention the chill on the road, how fine the sky looked near dusk, how fortunate you feel to have made the journey without incident. This is not interesting. That's the point. The weather offends no one. The weather has no brother who once lost a duel. The weather doesn't employ a cook who might someday poison your meat if you speak poorly of the roast. The Lord nods along, eyes faintly glazed. He was hoping for more, but he won't press. He's already forgotten most of what you said. You take a breath. You've bought yourself another 20 seconds of invisibility. Unfortunately, someone else across the table chooses that moment to chime in. A minor baron whose shirt is worth more than your family's land. He laughs loudly, steers the conversation back toward hunting, and references a particularly noble boar he skewered last autumn. The story is long, clearly rehearsed, and filled with anatomical details you didn't need while eating. Still, everyone at the table laughs, nods, murmurs approval, because that's what you do. Your mistake is reacting too slowly. You wince at a particularly vivid image of entrails hitting the underbrush, and don't chuckle quickly enough when the Baron finishes with a wink and a toast. His eyes catch yours, not hostile, not yet, but tracking. He saw the pause. He noted the silence. You raise your goblet anyway, smiling too broadly, hoping to smooth the edges. Another noble raises an eyebrow. You're being observed again. This is the trap. The conversation trap. It isn't about words, it's about social agility. You must navigate tone, implication, and memory. Every comment has a history. Every joke has a target. You don't know most of the people here. You don't know who's sleeping with whom, whose lands border whose bastard son is secretly being groomed for court. One misstep, one thoughtless anecdote, and you'll have insulted someone's cousin's mistress's brother without ever realizing it. You try to contribute again, carefully. You mention vaguely a similar hunt, one that took place several years ago in your uncle's woods, with much less fanfare and significantly more rain. It is not a good story. It doesn't have to be. You embellish slightly, include just enough self-deprecation to suggest humility, and leave it at a gentle laugh. Someone at the far end of the table offers a tight-lipped smile. The Baron says nothing. He has not forgotten your earlier pause. The conversation continues. Topics shift. Territories, horses, marriage alliances. One noblewoman recounts a rumour about a Spanish courtier with too many teeth. Someone else chuckles and says something about French manners. You nod along, contributing when prompted, laughing when required. You're becoming very good at pretending you're not terrified, but it's exhausting. You are not drunk enough for this. You take another sip of wine, larger this time. The warmth spreads immediately, a false comfort that dulls the edges of your panic but sharpens your tongue. You catch yourself about to offer an opinion on Spanish fashion and stop just in time, realizing that the man across from you, the one with the embroidered sleeves and the bored expression, is half Catalan and notoriously quick to offence. You pivot mid-sentence, praise the cut of his tunic, and mention how continental styles are clearly influencing the English court in delightful ways. He preens. You want to vomit. This is what it means to converse in noble company. Flattery, feigned interest, and the constant low-grade fear that a pun you don't understand will somehow ruin you. Everyone is lying. Everyone is watching. Everyone is building invisible fences around their own status, and you're being asked to dance through the gaps with a mouthful of half-chewed goose and a stomach full of dread. You are no longer eating for sustenance. You are no longer talking to connect. You are performing, one twitch away from disaster. The Lord of the Manor speaks again. This time, he asks your opinion on a matter of land, a border dispute, hypothetical of course, between two regions you barely remember the names of. He phrases it as a joke. You know better. It's a test. Say the wrong thing, and you might be seen as a sympathiser, or worse, an upstart. You clear your throat, offer a deliberately ambiguous platitude about the wisdom of compromise, and nod deferentially. He laughs, slaps the table, and declares your answer wise beyond your station. Everyone chuckles. You've passed for now. A servant appears to refill your wine. You let him. You are sweating. The wool of your doublet is sticking to your back. Your temples ache from smiling. Your tongue feels dry despite the wine. Across the table, two noblewomen are murmuring to each other while side-eyeing your end of the bench. One of them laughs into her cup. You pray they weren't talking about you. You know they probably were. Someone toasts again. A minor lord this time, rising unsteadily to praise the beauty of the evening and the generosity of the host. Everyone lifts their goblets. You do too. You clink gently against the pewter rim of your neighbour's cup, nod, and take a careful sip. The wine stings. You smile anyway. You've escaped for now. No insults, no missteps, no disasters. Just a string of half-formed phrases and deflections, stitched together with panic and politeness. The noble across from you returns to his meal. The lord turns away bored again. The pressure recedes. The eyes move on. You exhale slowly, give a non-committal smile, and prepare to disappear once more into the background. Just when you begin to suspect the evening might finally wind down, that perhaps the bear, the flatulence contest, and the undercooked mystery meat marks the climax of your suffering, someone claps loudly near the high table, and dessert is announced with a flourish. A new wave of servants enters, each carrying something colourful, trembling, or alarmingly architectural. The main course may have assaulted your dignity, but dessert is here to challenge your understanding of edible matter. The first platter to arrive at your end of the hall contains jellies, moulded into improbable shapes that clearly required a level of commitment no sane person should devote to animal collagen. There are towers, birds, serpents, and what might be a swan engaged in a passionate embrace with a pineapple. The colours are lurid and unnatural, vibrant reds, aggressive oranges, and a deep green that suggests something has gone very wrong in the herb garden. The jellies wobble with every footstep, quivering like feverish flesh, and you already know they will taste like sweetened glue and poor decisions. One is placed in front of you, a shimmering dome of lemon-yellow gelatin crowned with what appear to be preserved cherries and sprigs of thyme. It jiggles on the pewter plate like it's trying to escape. The smell is faintly citrusy, with a back note of boiled something. You know, without asking, that the base is made from hooves, specifically from whatever animals the kitchen happened to butcher earlier in the week. Cow, pig, deer, it doesn't matter. Bones boiled down, strained and clarified until they could be whipped into wobbly submission and served as a delicacy. You pick up your spoon and dig in. The texture is exactly what you feared. Slick, elastic, and reluctant. It resists your efforts before suddenly giving way, slumping into your mouth with the consistency of congealed oil. The flavour is faint, like lemon left too long in the sun, and underneath it, the unmistakable tang of whatever unholy mixture gives the dessert its shape. You chew, you swallow, you smile, and then you nod, because someone is watching. You nod as if it tastes divine. As if this jelly has elevated your understanding of cuisine instead of confirming your suspicion that nobles will eat anything as long as it's shaped like a mythical beast. Further down the table, more desserts arrive. There's a tray of marzipan castles, delicately sculpted and painted with edible pigment, which sounds impressive until you remember marzipan is mostly almond paste and powdered sugar, and it tastes like the inside of a wooden drawer. Still, the nobles eat it like it's manna, nibbling at the tiny marzipan towers and giggling when one crumbles into sweet gravel. Someone near the host offers a compliment about the delightful detail of the crenellations. Someone else agrees. You silently mourn for the cook who spent 6 hours shaping edible battlements for this display of powdered mediocrity. Another dish is passed, slices of fruit so stewed they've ceased to resemble fruit at all. What might once have been apples or pears now glisten in a brownish syrup, their flesh translucent and sagging. A spoonful lands on your plate with a wet slap. You take a bite. It tastes like sweetness and nothing else. No acidity, no freshness, just the flat, cloying syrupiness of something boiled until all memory of life was erased. Your teeth throb at the contact. The sugar is grainy. You bite down too hard and feel something shift. A dull crack near the back of your mouth that sends a cold lance of pain down your jaw. You keep chewing. There's eel too, because of course there is. Not the savoury roasted sort that at least has the decency to pretend it's dinner, but jellied eel, a cold shimmering mass encasing strips of oily grey flesh in a translucent dome. A noblewoman beside you coos over its appearance and lifts a piece delicately onto her plate, slicing through it as though it were goose liver. You watch, horrified, as she lifts a forkful to her mouth and closes her eyes. You're forced to take your own portion soon after. It smells like low tide. You swallow before your body realises what's happening. The sugar sculptures are the final insult, brought out on silver trays. Each one is a triumph of engineering and a failure of taste. There are sugar swans, sugar lions, sugar thrones. One depicts a pastoral scene, shepherds and sheep rendered in spun sugar so fine you can see the wrinkles in their robes. It looks more like a museum piece than a foodstuff. You overhear someone say, "It was carved by a Frenchman brought in specially for the event." The sugar gleams under the candlelight. It is beautiful. It is also inedible. You are offered a fragment of a sugar rose, chipped from one of the sculptures, by a servant wielding a small chisel. You place it in your mouth, where it promptly shatters into crystalline shards that slice at your gums and stick to your molars. The taste is pure white sugar, No spice, no citrus, no subtlety. Just pain and sweetness. You nod again. Of course you do. This is what you're here for. To witness the splendour. To chew your way through architectural marvels made of dental nightmares. To pretend that every mouthful is a privilege rather than a trial. At the far end of the table, someone bites down on a sugar figurine with a little too much enthusiasm and chips a tooth. They try to laugh it off. No one else laughs. That would be impolite. A servant quickly whisks away the broken sculpture and replaces it with a fresh one shaped like a stag. No one remarks on the replacement. You're not sure anyone even noticed. In this hall, even dental trauma is just another bump in the procession of performative excess. As the desserts continue to circulate, you feel your blood begin to slow. Not from fatigue, though that is certainly present, but from the sheer density of sugar and grease now pulsing through your veins. Your teeth ache, your stomach groans. Your tongue is coated in a film of syrup and regret. You sip more wine, hoping to dissolve the sludge collecting in your throat, but all it does is mix with the sugar and leave you tasting vinegar and overripe fruit. A servant passes by with yet another platter, this time of candied nuts, glistening with honey and shaped into rings and loops. You shake your head. He pauses as if confused, then moves on. The nobles beside you accept the nuts without hesitation. One of them begins playing with hers, looping the sugary strings around her fingers as though they were jewellery. You briefly consider the merits of choking on a candied almond, just to be excused from the next course. Near the high table, a small sugar tower begins to tremble. No one touches it. No one speaks. It leans just slightly, then more. And then, with the slow inevitability of all things poorly designed by foreign artisans and too much ambition, it collapses in on itself. A delicate crumble of lace-like sugar falling to the table with the sound of distant rain. You expect someone to gasp, or laugh, or at least comment, but no one does. No one even blinks. The noble closest to the wreckage sips from his goblet and waves vaguely for a servant to clean it up. And just like that, dessert is over. Just as the sugar sculpture is cleared away and the collective stomach of the hall settles into its final groaning stages, a hush spreads like a fog. It starts slowly, almost imperceptibly. A lull in the loot, a servant stepping back from the table, a noble lowering his spoon mid-scoop. Then the silence thickens, swallowing conversation and laughter, until all that remains is the creak of benches and the soft hiss of torches along the walls. You feel it before you understand it. Something is about to happen. Something important. At the head of the hall, a figure rises. His goblet is already in hand. Whether he's the host himself, or merely high enough to act like it, you're not entirely sure. Perhaps it's the lord of the manor. Perhaps it's a duke. Perhaps, God help you, it's Henry. You squint toward the dais, but don't dare stare. The face is flushed from drink and power, the smile practiced, the presence heavy enough to quiet a room of several dozen nobles who are all used to being the loudest person in it. Whoever he is, he's important, which means this is a royal toast, or close enough to pass for one, which means you are officially in danger. A royal toast is not just a drink. It is a performance, a sequence of movements, glances and carefully timed sips so ritualized it might as well be a religious ceremony. Get it right, and you remain invisible. Get it wrong, and you become a name whispered behind fans, a face remembered for the wrong reasons, a footnote in someone else's fall from grace. And if the host is royalty, if the crown sits anywhere near this table, then one misstep isn't just embarrassing, it's fatal. Treason, after all, is nothing if not flexible in its definition. The noble raises his goblet. You raise yours, but not yet to your lips. First comes the rise, a slow measured ascent from the bench, not too fast to appear overeager, not too slow to appear reluctant. Your knees creak. Your cloak snags slightly under your heel. You plant your feet and steady your hands. Around you, dozens of others do the same. A rustling wave of silk, velvet, and strained wool spreads outward as the table stands as one organism united in fragile coordination. The toast begins. It's long. They always are. Flowery words about honour, loyalty, divine favour, the glory of the realm, the generosity of the host, and some vaguely veiled praise for whichever monarch is most convenient to flatter. If it's Henry, and you still haven't confirmed whether it is, then the toast must include strength, wisdom, and at least one reference to God's will manifesting in royal flesh. You hear majesty, blessing, immortal line, and fruitful wives all in the same breath. You do not react. Your arm holding the goblet begins to tremble slightly. You shift your grip, careful not to spill. Somewhere across the hall someone coughs. Someone else chuckles too loudly. The noble speaking narrows his eyes in that direction. You suppress the urge to turn and look. Rule number 1 of surviving the royal toast: do not draw attention, even if someone else already has. The speech winds its way toward a crescendo. You recognize the signs. The speaker's voice lifts slightly. His stance stiffens. The phrasing grows increasingly pompous. A reference to the indomitable soul of England is followed by the shining path of divine providence, which means you're nearly there. You raise your goblet a fraction higher, elbow out just enough to signify engagement, and steel yourself. The final words come loud and solemn: to the crown and to our gracious host. That's the cue. You lift the goblet fully, but do not drink yet. First, the hold, a respectful pause as if letting the weight of the words settle into your soul. Your arm burns slightly. Your face is expressionless. Then and only then do you sip. One sip. Not a gulp, not a taste, not a swish. A controlled swallow. Eyes forward, chin down. No slurping, no grimacing, no commentary. The wine hits your tongue and you immediately regret everything. It's the same cloying red you've been served all evening, but this time it's warmer, sharper, closer to vinegar than anything celebratory. There's an undertone of pepper, something plum-like, and a finish that suggests someone stored it too near the hearth for too long. It burns as it goes down, not in a pleasant, bracing way, in a way that suggests your throat has become mildly inflamed by years of subpar vintage and aristocratic delusion. You swallow. The heat travels downward, hits your already crowded stomach, and sours instantly. Your guts respond with a low, uneasy churn, a kind of liquid growl that you pray no one else can hear. You steady yourself, lower the goblet, and, crucially, sit down only when the rest of the table begins to move. Sit too early, and you risk offending the host. Sit too late, and you risk looking daft. Timing is everything. Your timing is mercifully correct. Barely. The noble finishes his speech with a raised hand and a satisfied sigh. He's pleased with himself. The hall breathes again, though no one quite relaxes. The ritual has been completed. No one was dragged away. No one fainted. No one spilled. That counts as a success. You glance at the man beside you. He's already polishing off the rest of his goblet, unconcerned by taste or temperature. His cheeks are flushed, and he's begun humming again. You envy him. Not because he's happy. He isn't. He's too far gone to be anything. You envy the freedom, the weightlessness of not caring whether you say the wrong thing or drink the wrong way or sneeze at the wrong moment. He'll be remembered, if at all, as that loud one near the fire. You, however, are still under observation. A servant appears behind you, ready to refill your cup. You hesitate, but only for a moment. Declining would be noticed. You nod. The cup is filled. The wine swirls like blood in a bowl. Around the room, conversation begins again. It's softer now, more fractured. The natural collapse that follows prolonged attention. People murmur about the toast, the speaker, the host's reaction. Someone mentions the bear again. Someone else speculates about whether dessert will be followed by a final course. A few laugh, a few do not. You sip again. The burn is no less unpleasant, but now at least it has a purpose. You made it through the toast. You did not disgrace yourself. You did not draw attention. You did not forget the sequence. Rise, raise, sip, sit. You have proven once again that you're competent enough to be tolerated and forgettable enough to be safe. Your stomach turns. You smile anyway. The music starts again, which at first seems like a sign that the evening is drawing to a close. A final bit of lute warbling, a few polite murmurs, and then perhaps you'll be allowed to stagger back out into the night and reflect quietly on the structural damage done to your digestive system. But no, the music is not the end. It is the signal that the end may be approaching, slowly, painfully, and not without a series of tests that feel more psychological than ceremonial. The guests begin to shift in their seats. Not stand, not yet, but perform the kinds of subtle gestures that suggest forward momentum without making any actual progress. A noble tucks a napkin beneath his goblet. A lady adjusts her ruff with an air of practiced weariness. Someone coughs twice in that particular tone of, "What a lovely evening," which is code for, "Please God, let it be over." Servants appear again, not with food or drink, but with damp cloths and shallow bows, collecting dishes and stacking trenchers as if they've all decided the party's momentum must now be reversed. Still, no one stands. That's the trick of it. No one wants to be first, and absolutely no one wants to be last. So everyone hovers in this strange purgatory of preparation, signalling readiness to depart without making the fatal mistake of leading the charge. Leaving too early, after all, implies boredom, or worse, insult. It suggests that the host's company, food or presence, was insufficient. But leave too late and you risk desperation, lingering in hopes of being noticed, rewarded, or pitied. Neither is safe. The safest course is to leave exactly one moment after someone slightly more important than you, and exactly one moment before someone slightly less. Which is difficult because nearly everyone here is more important than you. You consider your options. You've barely spoken to anyone above your rank. You haven't offended anyone, you think, and your only major gaffe, the sneeze, was early enough that it's likely faded into the night's background noise of minor sins. But still standing now would draw eyes. Sitting too long would draw whispers. You glance at the woman across from you, who is dabbing at her lip with a lace cloth in slow hypnotic circles. She seems like she's preparing to rise. Then she leans back. A feint, a false start. You remain seated. The bench beneath you has become a torture device. Your knees ache from too much sitting, your spine from too much posture. The pressure in your stomach is not just uncomfortable now, it's oppressive. A solid, bloated ache that throbs with every heartbeat. You feel as though you've swallowed a cannonball made of jellied eel and shame. The wine sits atop it like a thick layer of regret, and every sip you took to get through the toasts now simmers with threat. You shift carefully, hoping to relieve pressure. You do not succeed. At the high table, the host rises, not quickly, not with flair, just a gentle movement upward that sends an immediate ripple through the room. People straighten, conversations halt. A few guests near the front stand as well, not entirely sure whether they're meant to, but assuming it's better to appear eager than inattentive. The host raises a hand, offers a few final words, pleasantries mostly, some thanks for good company, and a vague reference to seeing everyone again, soon, which you interpret as a threat. Then he bows, slightly, and steps back from the table. That's it. That's the break. The dam cracks. People begin to rise, slowly, awkwardly, in small clusters, like deer realizing the hunter has turned away. There's a flurry of murmured thanks, half bows, polite nods. You push yourself up with both hands, your legs wobbling slightly beneath the weight of full belly and stifled panic. Someone brushes past you with a cheerful word. You smile, though you're not sure if it's real or just a final contraction of your facial muscles before they give out entirely. You bow. You aim for respectful, but not sycophantic. Your knees complain audibly. Your back joins in with a quiet pop. Your cloak, somehow, has become half twisted around your waist. And your left shoe has developed a new tendency to squeak with every third step. You do not fix these things. You simply move slowly toward the nearest exit, like a man wading through honey, hoping no one notices the faint sheen of sweat clinging to your forehead. Servants murmur farewells in flat tones. Thank you for attending, my lord. Safe travels, my lady. We hope the evening was to your satisfaction. You hear these phrases repeated over and over as each guest files past. No one responds meaningfully. Some nod, some don't. One man mumbles, "It certainly was something," which might be the most honest assessment of the evening offered by anyone. When it's your turn, a young servant with tired eyes looks up at you and says, "We are honoured by your presence." He says it like he's reading from a stone tablet. You thank him. You are not sure if you mean it. You stumble through the manor gate and into the night like a man returning from war. The cold hits immediately, a sharp slap across your sweat-dampened face that jolts something in your brain awake. Or tries to. You breathe deeply and immediately regret it. The sharp air scrapes through your throat, cuts across your tongue, and seems to activate the entire fermenting banquet, still shifting inside your stomach, like wet masonry. You gag briefly. Nothing comes up, but the threat is clear. You walk slower after that. The courtyard is half cleared now, the fire pit's doused, the horses mostly gone. A few stragglers hover near the edge of the stable yard, making vague farewells in tones too hoarse to be sincere. No one meets your eye. Everyone's eyes are heavy now, from drink, from meat, from the weight of having survived another evening without embarrassing themselves in front of someone important. That's the true sport of these things, not enjoying yourself, but exiting without incident. As you pass the manor's side entrance, a servant steps from the shadows. He carries a tray of leftovers, still warm, if not fresh. A few slices of jellied eel, a chunk of bread, a small boiled pudding with a spoon already sunk into its side. He offers it to you with a tired half smile, the kind that suggests this is meant to be a kindness, a parting gift for guests who didn't eat enough. You wave it away without thinking. The smell alone is enough to make your stomach pitch. The eel's grey flesh glistens in the torchlight. You don't trust yourself to speak. The servant shrugs and turns away, muttering something about waste. You find your borrowed horse where you left it, and by some miracle, you manage to mount it again. The beast snorts and shifts, clearly resenting your presence. You whisper something that might be an apology. The ride back is long, slow, and filled with a silence broken only by your own stomach protesting with wet, confused sounds. The wine has turned on you. The meat is rising in waves. Your tongue feels coated in lard and ash. Every time the horse jolts forward, you taste regret. By the time you reach your lodging, a small rented room above a cooper's shop, 2 towns over, your legs barely function. Dismounting is an exercise in controlled collapse. You tie the horse loosely to the post and stagger inside, past the dozing innkeeper, who gives you a glance and then wisely decides not to speak. You climb the stairs gripping the wall like a drowning man. When you reach the top, you hesitate outside your door, then lean your head against the frame and breathe. The smell of warm wood and candle wax is almost enough to make you cry. Inside, your chamber pot waits, noble, patient, inevitable. You light a single tallow candle, casting just enough light to confirm that yes, the room is still as small and unwelcoming as it was when you left it. You begin removing your clothes piece by piece. The doublet peels off your back with a wet sucking sound. Your hose feels tighter than before. Your shirt is damp and slightly sticky beneath the arms, and your collar has become a ring of stiffened starch and sweat. You drop everything in a pile on the floor and sit on the edge of your bed, legs spread, head in your hands. Then your stomach makes a sound like a dying goat. You dive for the chamber pot. What follows is not dignified. The body rebels in stages, first dry heaves, then retching, then something looser and more primal. The eel, the wine, the jellies, the sugar shards, all of it stages a mutiny. Your ribs hurt from the effort, your knees shake. When it's over, you slump against the wall, too tired to be ashamed. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and immediately regret it. Your sleeve smells of gravy and someone else's perfume. Eventually, you wash your face in a chipped basin filled with water that's long since gone cold. It doesn't help. Your skin feels greasy, your mouth tastes worse, and your hands, no matter how many times you scrub them, still carry the phantom stickiness of meat juice and marzipan. You consider cutting them off. Then you consider crawling under the bed and never emerging again. Instead, you dry them on a threadbare towel and crawl into bed, still half naked, still shivering, still vibrating from the effort of surviving. Your stomach won't settle. It shifts and bubbles with ominous intent, like a pot left too long over a fire. You curl onto your side and try to think of anything else. You think of the bear. You think of the nobleman with the sticky goblet and the jester who called you a priest-arsed heretic. You think of the sugar sculpture collapsing like a metaphor. You think of the wine, of course, the last thing you tasted before the world tipped sideways and your bowels declared war. You pull the blanket over your head. It smells of dust and damp linen. You don't care. Your feet are still cold. Your breath, trapped beneath the blanket, smells of lard and bile. You deserve this. Somewhere in your mind, you remember the smile of the host, calm, oily, satisfied. You remember the way he raised his goblet, the way he said your name wrong. You remember the toast, the speeches, the applause. You remember how many people saw you, how many names were spoken. You remember nothing specific that you did wrong, but that only makes it worse. Because you know how these things work. Sometimes the punishment isn't for what you did. It's for how you looked while doing it. Too eager, too stiff, too pale, too silent, too there. You lie still. Minutes pass, or hours, you lose track. Your stomach gurgles again, a low, sustained sound that promises more misery to come. You groan, you curl tighter. Your hands are clenched, your jaw aches, and your temples pulse with the beginnings of a headache that will likely carry you into dawn. And still somehow, the fear remains, not of illness, not of food, not even of vomiting until you see stars, but of what comes next, of what they'll say, of what you may have implied with a glance or a pause or a raised goblet too early. You wonder who noticed, you wonder what they'll remember, you wonder if your name will come up again, in letters, in whispers, in quiet conversations between people, with enough influence to make your life smaller than it already is. You close your eyes, you pray, not to feel better, not even to forget. You just pray for something decisive, for dawn, for sleep, for death, whichever comes first. And as your belly churns and your breath thickens in the stale air, you finally understand the truth. The banquet is over, but it never really ends. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. Bloated, breathless, and slumped somewhere near the privies of history. If you're still listening, thank you for enduring the jellied eels, the social anxiety, and the long gurgling descent into Tudor hospitality. If you'd like early access to more slow, uncomfortable spirals into historical misery, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other forgotten corners of history you'd like to see covered. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Amanda Lampke. Sleep well.